morning, everyone. You'll have to excuse me because I'm a little sick. But I'm going to talk about my husband's grandmother, Margaline, and she was a secretary in the 1950s. She worked up to the age of 50, and that was around 1985. But her first job was when she did work as a secretary, and she worked in a local newsroom that printed a newspaper in a big city, Philadelphia. There was one editor whom she worked under, and they completed mundane tasks but at a very efficient pace. There were only two other females that worked at that time as secretaries in her company. When she moved to Florida in the 1970s, that was when she continued working other less important retail jobs. She was really just raising her kids at that time. She described the workplace in the 50s and 60s as very integrated, and you were working under a certain authority, and that, everybody strived to just kind of follow the rules. And there was very little protest, and workers just completed the tasks that were given to them, and they didn't have much question because they just wanted to earn an income. Um, Also, it was commonplace for you to stay at whatever company that you were with for the long haul, which had many benefits because people had families much younger than they do now, and they wanted to offer incentives to people that stayed at a company for long. This was the time before Medicaid or anything like that, so some of the incentives were job security. They gave some job retiree health plans, which they don't really do today, um, and pension plans as well. So people really wanted to stay with the company that they worked with in that time. Um, she talked to me a little bit about the industrial boom in America in the 1950s. She was young in her 20s during this time, but she remembers that at this time factory workers were making a decent living, probably one of the best, and a lot of people also worked in banks, law offices, real estate offices, things that are similar to today. But there were a lot more small-owned businesses. People worked in the family business, restaurants, soda shops, places like that, and they were privately and family run. You don't see a lot of that left today. Um, the kind of things that they did in those jobs is, especially in the 1950s, the factory workers made a lot of cars as these were booming. People were purchasing cars and televisions also. These were big ticket items that weren't available in the previous wartime shortages. So people were kind of going crazy for these things right now. Her job in particular as a secretary was similar today, minus the technologies. Some of her duties were typing on a typewriter, organizing files, some kind of secretarial work. But one thing that changed greatly, she informed me, was that in the 1980s, the typing became keyboarding, and people had to get trained in that. And now there's all kinds of organizational programs and other software to help input or information for secretaries today. Um, People in the 1950s, Marby said, had great pride in their place of employment. They usually wanted to be there for the long term, as she said. It's not like today how people job hop, they go from job to job to job. Um, People who didn't like to leave. They liked to get the benefits of staying. She said a lot of times women did not work. That was still common for women to not work. And the men tended to be slaves to their jobs, constantly working, trying to get that income in for their families as they were young families. But the economy was taking off when Marvy was started working, especially with the advancement of television. There was a lot of large television companies locally at this time. They were all coming up and about. Um, as far as management practices, women weren't so easily accepted into the workplace still at this time. When Marvy was in her mid 20s, it was kind of more like an idea of coping with a woman, having to so that they had enough employees. They were never in management positions, so she wasn't sure that much about how management positions were, except that men were always in them. and they had to they had to accept these because they needed women. So there also wasn't equal opportunity for every employer like there is today. There wasn't statements when you started a job that said, no one will be discriminated against, everybody will be treated as equal, everybody's on scale for a raise. That kind of stuff wasn't really a thing back then. Um, but she said that in her time, she did notice that people started to pay more and more attention to the behaviors of their employees and not just treat them like a line, but see the things that they were doing. And um, this was a big thing in behavioral science of management as the time went on. Um, as far as how the organizations changed over time, um, they changed greatly over her lifetime. And the biggest change, of course, that she stated was technology and how technology has been integrated into the workplace. Secretaries nowadays are overwhelmed with equipment that makes their job very efficient, very fast paced, um, electronically. And there's so many advances in this sense. And women are much more accepted into male positions as well as unisex positions than they ever were before. I mean, women can be CEOs of companies nowadays. You see that a lot. There's been a great amount of change in her lifetime, and she is constantly amazed by all the changes that she sees. And how can you not be? There's so much. Thank you so much. Have a good day.